Greetings, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today on today's webcast. I'm excited to have you. My name is Dina Evans, and I'm the Senior Manager of Global Events here at LookingGlass Cyber Solutions. I'm very excited to introduce today's presentation of Reducing Risk by Examining Threats that are Forming in the Cyber Ecosystem. Our LookingGlass presenters for today's webcast, we have Michael Suby, who's the VP of Research at Frost & Sullivan, and we have James Carnall, who's our VP of Customer Support Group here at LookingGlass. A great group of presenters for us today. And before we get started with the webcast, just a few quick notes on housekeeping items in the BrightTalk platform. Just want to make note that there's a chat screen that our audience has where you can feel free to submit any questions that you have for today's presenters. We'll be addressing the questions at the end of the presentation during the Q&A section. If we happen to run out of time, if we don't get through all the submitted questions, don't worry, we will be able to contact you directly after the webcast. And then also note that any questions that are submitted through the chat feature are only viewed by the presenters and not by fellow audience members. So if you happen to prefer to have a question addressed privately, just indicate that in your comments and we'll contact you directly if so desired. And also note that there's an attachments and links section in your audience screen with a few resources for you to peruse at your convenience relevant to today's topic. So please take a few minutes and check those out. And then lastly, and very importantly, if any of you need to obtain an hour of CPE credit toward your professional certification for viewing today's webcast and didn't happen to enter your membership number when you registered, you can send that to us as well through the chat window. It automatically shows us who that's coming from, so we'll have your name and your email address already. Just send us your membership number. We'll make sure to submit that for your CPE credit. And so at this point, without any further delay, I'm going to go ahead and pass this over to one of our featured presenters, to Mike, and I'll let you take it away. Mike?
Why, thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be with all of you today, and thank you for joining us. I just have a few slides and then and commentary on those slides, and then be followed by James, and then of course, as just outlined, we'll take your questions. The title to my slides, Protecting Your Business Requires a Calculated Response to What Lurks Outside Your Walls. And, part of the way that I frame this is I think about the way many organizations are set up to conduct cybersecurity. They build walls, they recognize the walls that they have to prevent bad things from entering in. Bad things still happen, and so then they focus on detection. How can we find what got in that we intended to prevent, understand how threatening it might be, and taking appropriate actions. Billions of dollars have been spent. Frost & Sullivan, we look at many markets in cybersecurity technologies, and literally it is billions a year is spent on technology. But it's not just technology, it's personnel. It's also process. It's a significant amount of investment. Yet, as anyone who's following the news these days knows, that bad things still happen. Data breaches occur, operations are disrupted, and brands, relationships are damaged, and that trust needs to be rebuilt. What we think organizations need to do is not stop what they're already doing, but expand upon what they're doing. And that expansion means, are you looking out at the broader cyber ecosystem to understand what might be building and possibly aiming to attack you? Also, what may be already extracted from your organization and available on the outside world. And so what is this cyber ecosystem? Let me put it in 4 categories. Certainly there could be more, but I'll just say 4. There's that surface web, those areas of the web that you can find that there's links for, they're searchable. There's social media platforms. In fact, the vast majority of consumers, as we've done research on, I think 2/3 of them are on some type of social media environment. And then about that same number are also getting news from online sources. There's also the deep web, these many non-searchable locations that are out there. They're not part of, you can't see them in your search engine. And then finally, there's the dark web, these special places that might require some additional credentials for you to get in. And if I may, James, I'd like to ask you, in your position, do you look at the categories of the cyber ecosystem any differently?
No, I think those 4 categories are very good there, Mike. I mean, again, as you said, the surface web is pretty much anything that you can navigate to with a browser, right? You can go to Google and you can search for something. The social web is user-generated content, right? It typically has some sort of wall around it through a username or password. You need to get access to it. But again, it's generated by you and I and others out there that have their own individual accounts. Mm-hmm. The deep web is the ones that are concealed. You know, again, it's still navigated. You can still navigate there through a browser, but typically you don't know that they're out there unless you actually have the link or you have that URL. Web browsers are usually discouraged from indexing them, right? Robots.txt commands can shield. So if you wanted to keep that away, we typically see those sites, and there's an ecosystem there that you can't just simply put a query in a search engine and find. But if you know where you're going, you can navigate there. And then that dark net or dark web area is where you need, as you've mentioned, special tools, or you know, it's a Tor network or some of these other tools to navigate there, and there's a whole other ecosystem. But it's not quite as big as people would imagine, right? I mean, there's less sites in that environment than there are seats in the Rose Bowl, right? The Rose Bowl's got about 90,000 seats. There's only about 65 to 70,000 sites, actual sites in that ecosystem. So.
Yeah, very good, James. And yeah, a key point that I'm taking from what you just said is, as we look from, say, the top half of this slide to the bottom half, that point of if you know where you're going in the deep and dark web.
Yep. Very good point. Yep.
Now I want to just segue to, you know, when we think about the cyber ecosystem, we also need to think about, well, what are the threats? And there are threats out there, and they're very real and sinister. And so let me just touch on a few of these. First, there's social media. I mean, this is an environment that in many ways has no holds barred. You, an individual, can, as James said, it's our content that we put up there. It's our content that we choose to like. It's or somebody else's content, and we can retweet or send it on to our followers. And so it creates for any individual the potential global megaphone to express opinions, whether fact-based or not. There's also domains that organizations have spent literally thousands or millions of dollars on their domains because they're an expression of their brand. But one of the threats out there is what we'll call cyber squatting, where organizations will choose to take a domain that looks like a company's brand and use it for a variety of purposes. Could be extortion, could be a way to upset that organization's brand. It also could be a way to attract more of their customers. Especially on that last one, if you think about it, if they're attracting your customers to a lookalike site rather than your own, you're missing the opportunity to make impressions and favorable impressions on those visitors. But there's also another element of domains, and that gets into domains are used for phishing. They're also used for business email compromise. I'm sure many of you are very familiar with that type of scheme, but essentially it is an organization or an individual trying to pose as somebody other than themselves, most likely somebody of high responsibility, and making a request of somebody in lower responsibility to pass on some sensitive information. It could be W-4 information, it could be a list of payroll, other payroll type of information, it could be a means to help facilitate an electronic transfer. The whole goal here is gaining information, gaining money by posing as somebody in a sense of trust and responsibility, to get somebody lower down in the organization to supply information that they have. And then there's news media, online news media. As I already said, probably about 2/3 to 3/4 of online users rely on various news sources, online news sources. The problem with that, while valuable in the sense of access to a tremendous amount of quote-unquote news, is not all of it is curated news. And so if you're an organization, you have a need to protect your brand, you also have a need to understand what is being populated out there, not just by social media, which is important, but also through the online news channel. And if you find something that, let's say, is incorrect and is threatening to your organization, threatening to your brand, possibly even threatening to your facilities and personnel, then you have to make a decision, how do I want to react to that, or how should I react to it? And then there are tremendous amounts of data breaches that occur, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. Two examples I'll talk about from the standpoint of information that gets extracted and then assembled with other pieces of information and used for less than good reasons. Things like an executive's travel itinerary. That information should be private, but let's say it gets out. Giving information about an executive where he or she is going on a certain day could put that individual at risk, as well as it could be a signal of what is a priority for that organization as this person is wherever he or she may be, and what could be taken from it. Say, is there some type of merger and acquisition going on? Then just on the lower right-hand portion of this slide, a little picture of a drone in the Wall Street Journal. If you're a reader of the Wall Street Journal, you might have saw there was a news article just last week talking about how the maintenance instructions for a U.S. drone, aerial drone, had been stolen and was attempted to be sold within the dark web. This information, depending on whose hands it got into and what else they might have collected, could be rather sensitive. So back to you, James. I'm going to ask you, what else might you be seeing at LookingGlass in terms of significant threats?
Yeah, I mean, and again, you've highlighted a lot of them, but definitely the ones that have had the most impact are the ones that recently to organizations is the social engineering aspect. So as you mentioned, the business email compromise scam, we've seen companies losing up to $44 million because of a transaction that occurred through somebody registering a domain that has a name very similar to the company's brand, essentially then creating through that an MX record, so an email, sending an email as if it's somebody with authority, like the CEO or somebody in charge of HR or accounting, and asking for all W-2s or to transfer a vendor account and then make a payment immediately for a merger and acquisition or for purchasing of materials. And what's interesting about that, Mike, is it's not being captured within the firewall because there's no malicious attachment or there's no other way for that to be detected. And it looks like a legitimate email. So all you can protect for in that sort of case is the culture of the company, the ability for somebody to get up and ask a question. The other sorts of threats that we typically see, though, are doxing, right? The collection of an executive's information and purged out there somewhere on the dark or deep web for the purposes of attacking them. Those are the phone campaigns you see or the letter campaigns, or it could be a busload of people showing up at the front door to intimidate that business or that individual. Social security numbers. We have seen source code, right? So if you're in a tech sort of company, somebody collecting some very sensitive source code on a new product that they are trying to sell as a one-off. I mean, you've mentioned here the drone technology. That happens quite regularly with certain foreign governments, with that information leaking, but it could be the recipe for a new flavor for a company or any of these sorts of critical bits of information that they have or IP. But so it's not just the deep web or the dark web. I mean, in some cases, these are not always malicious, but sometimes they are. They're projects that are being disclosed on somebody's LinkedIn account because they're sharing too much, or You know, people have been vulnerable because of dating sites, and they share too much information. So these are all avenues where people and organizations are at risk, and quite often, you know, they're tricked.
Well, thank you, James. That was good background. Let me just continue on this theme of you know, traditional cybersecurity, of fences, prevention sort of capabilities, defenses, as well as incident detection and response. Again, all well and good, essential capabilities that all digitally connected organizations need to have. But it's not enough. It's an internal shield. It's protecting that soft inside of the organization. The focus is, you know, protecting that, as well as seeing indicators of compromise that a malicious actor has gotten in. While, again, well and good, it's not necessarily taking a sufficient focus as to what's happening on the outside in this greater cyber ecosystem that you know, could represent a staging ground for a potential impending attack on the organization. Also, many organizations do take advantage of external threat intelligence. While that is definitely a good step, it in many cases can be an insufficient step. Because just like your internal organization, alerts are happening, events are occurring, and those have to be investigated to see if it's truly a legitimate incident and what is the priority in terms of addressing it. Generic external threat intel, while good, it still takes a lot of curation. It still takes a lot of, let's understand what is the context of this information within our organization. How should we prioritize it from a standpoint of a threat? How should we prioritize how we should remediate? And so I think as you look towards the future of taking greater advantage of external threat information coming from this broader cyber ecosystem, you need to think in terms of, I need it tailored. I need it tailored to my tastes, rather than, hey, it's a generic information that could be valuable for many, but again, values in the sense of the beholder, you need to be able to take action on it. You know, we talked a little bit about, or I talked a little bit about data breaches. Certainly that is just one of the risks that are out there, but I think it's also instructional to look at data breaches in terms of some of the statistics that are out there, because it exemplifies how cyber miscreants, threat actors, hackers and the such, they work with speed. They are very able adversaries. And so on the top left-hand, or the left-hand side of this slide, here was an interesting study that was done by a company called Nuix, where they asked professional penetration testers and incident responders how fast can they do certain tasks. And what they found is in less than 15 hours, 80% of them said they could breach the perimeter of an organization. In less than 15 hours, they said that they could identify critical, valuable data after breaching that perimeter in 89% of the targets that they penetrated. And then finally, in another 15 hours, or less than 15 hours, 89% of the times they could exfiltrate the data. So think about it. On a collective basis, within less than 2 hours, people in the know, and this could be attackers as well, most likely attackers, can penetrate the perimeter, find data that they're looking for, data of value, and exfiltrate it. And then when we look at actual data breaches, you know, many of us take advantage of the great work done by Verizon and its data breach investigation reporting and its partners that they have in that. 73% of breaches are perpetuated by outsiders. No surprise, but certainly there's still a lot that's going on by insiders as well. 68% of these breaches, which I think this is really rather astounding, is that it took months or longer to discover. I've seen other survey data and on this and heard similar type of stories that it's not hours, it's not days, it's weeks, if not months, before a data breach has been discovered. And here's another strange thing, or astounding thing, if you'd like. It's not that it's not discovered quickly. The people that are discovering this, it's 4 times more likely that it's an external partner than it is the organization that has been breached. So again, just a little bit of indication of what's going on in terms of threats. So as I step back and say, well, what's the state of the affairs? Well, I think shield defenses and internally focused detection response, again, you've got to have it. It's essential to your cybersecurity arsenal, but it's going to be incomplete. You need to expand upon what you have and modulate on your cybersecurity strategies. And I believe that includes having focus on the cyber ecosystems and the threats that are potentially out there. Now, as you consider how to go about the approach of creating cybersecurity threat protection, it's, do I want to do this on my own or do I want to partner? I think there's some very good parallels with what we see going on in managed and professional security services. That is a high growth market. In North America, we've estimated that market to be $8 billion last year, and it's growing at double digits rate through the forecast period up to the 2022. And then also other indicators that we have is that over 1/2 of the surveyed organizations are looking for security services. They're either using them right now and many of them are looking to expand as well. Now, you may have heard many of the reasons for why managed professional security services are wanted, and like I said, I think there's I know there are good parallels with why it's valuable to partner with somebody for managed professional security services as well as cyber ecosystem threat protection. And they are as follows. It's tight labor market out there and there's skill challenges. The difference, I would say, as it pertains to traditional managed security services and cyber ecosystem threat protection, is that the roles are reversed. The threat hunters you have within your own organization, they are looking to detect the cyber adversaries. Those adversaries are trying to discover what's in that environment, and they're also trying to avoid detection. Now, let's say you're a threat hunter in the greater cyber ecosystem. The role's reversed. You are now the hunter. You are now the one that need to find the areas to look and also avoid being detected so you can continue to collect and assimilate valuable information. Experience is required. Again, this is valuable in managed security services, but also in cyber ecosystem threat protection. It's a different type of skills. You need to know where to hunt and how to be effective in hunting in those areas and when to go look for what. Scale is very much the case. This is a data-intensive business, threat hunting, whether it's internal or external, but particularly on external, as we think about it, it's not just, you're looking at this greater cyber ecosystem, as we talked about, the surface, the social media, the deep and dark web. These are many expansive areas to be collecting data on, and it needs to be assimilated, curated, and prioritized. And then finally, there's the advantage of partnering is the community effect. The fact that the partner is engaged with multiple clients and in several geographies, multiple verticals, allows them to gain perspective from multiple angles. I would also say there's another community effect that applies, and that is the community effect within the organization itself of the partner that you're choosing for cyber ecosystem threat protection, that their core personnel are exchanging ideas and learning from each other and creating, say, more of a beehive sort of capability. And so again, there's a community effect times 2 going on. So let me just end with the point of, as you look to partner, what should you look for? And so here's just 6 items. You may have different priorities, but these are the ones that I would suggest. You want to look for an organization, a partner, that their business has been in the intelligence business. It's a unique set of skills required, and so you'll be looking for that as a core representation of their capabilities. You want to look for an organization that they just haven't started this up. This is something that they built over time, that they have the experts, that have the experience necessary to do effective capabilities. They need to have massive scale. As we talked about, it's very much a big data sort of business of collection, curation, prioritization. Holistic service. By that I mean not all organizations need the same type of capabilities or want the same type of capabilities. Different priorities. The priorities might be, I want to protect my core network, my core systems better than what I want. So I want to supplement what I already have in terms of my preventive capabilities with more external eyes and talent out there looking for things that are, again, trying to penetrate my network. Or it might be, I'm concerned about my brand. I'm concerned about my reputation. These are multi-billion-dollar values out there that I need to protect. And so I need to understand what's going on out there in this greater cyber ecosystem, so I can understand if my brand, if my reputation is going to be under threat or at risk. And finally, I have personnel. I have facilities that I may need to, and I want to protect. How can I make sure that not just my executives, but down to my rank and file, that they are not at personal risk? How do I make sure that or I'm at least clued in to the potential risk that may come about to my own facilities, say as in an impromptu protest? You want to address a spectrum of risks, and that kind of goes in line with the holistic service. And finally, as I mentioned before, that the generic versus tailored, you truly want this capability to be tailored for you. You don't want to be inundated with threat intelligence that's generic, that could apply to many. You want threat intelligence that's very relevant to you, that's prioritized for your risks, your tolerances, your circumstances. Anything less is in some regards going to be labor upon yourself. And let me just finish my slides with my last key takeaways. As I mentioned, cybersecurity strategies must evolve. They must evolve with real-world realities. The world is going to continue to evolve, and so you need to have this holistic kind of broader viewpoint on what's going on, which leads to cyber ecosystem threat protection. It's valuable. It adds a stabilizing leg to the stool. And then finally, don't do it on your own. Certainly that's at your decision to be made, but I'd recommend at least looking into partners and be wise in the selection of your partners. Use the criteria that I just shared in the previous slide. And with that, I'd like to turn over to James.
Thank you very much, Mike. Appreciate it. So again, and Mike, we'll talk about this a little bit at the end, but there's a white paper, correct, in regards to some of these concepts that people can digest, correct?
That is true.
Very good. All right. So thank you very much for joining us. Again, in relationship to Mike's presentation, I wanted to touch on a couple of areas where in that sort of theme where we feel that LookingGlass can help organizations and provide some of that value. Now again, whether it's us or whether it's another provider, we get that. Again, the key thing is for this ecosystem and for you as an organization to be protected, it's very important that you're doing something. And again, that's essentially why Mike and I are doing this webinar so we can sort of get your juices flowing. You can read the white paper, and again, you can certainly reach out to us here at LookingGlass for more information, or again, your current vendor, or if you don't have one and you need some guidance there, certainly that's what Michael's here for, and certainly I'd be happy at the end to talk to anybody. But just at a high level, let me just give you a bit of perspective in regards to LookingGlass. Again, typically clients come to us because they need or want all or some of the following, which is it could be data feeds, and again, they could be enriched or just raw, such as, I need all the zone files for all domains registered so I can block them from my firewall, so anybody within my organization can't come in or out from one of these newly registered domains. That would be an example. We have a services team, which we'll talk about a little bit more today in this webinar, so I'll focus more on that later. Obviously, threat platforms, and I think we all know the need to be able to digest and run queries and have information at our fingertips. Typically, we're looking at that single pane of glass concept. People want to be able to make their teams as efficient as possible, and platforms are one way of doing that. Certainly we have a network topography capability, which is very unique in the marketplace, where people tend to come to us for that. And then mitigation devices, right, or applications. How do I fix or stop or prevent or have visibility into things that are happening in our network? So, again, I've been in this industry for over 13 years now, specifically here at LookingGlass, obviously more total. But with LookingGlass's experience of over 20 years, in relationship to that ecosystem that Mike was talking about, we sort of break it up into how do we protect an organization's data, their people, their assets, their brand, and their revenue, obviously, and that's the fraud and the phishing concept. Because these are all important areas of a business if we break it down from the LookingGlass perspective. And those are the areas where over the years we've had a lot of experience, we've had a lot of opportunity to figure out how to identify these threats, work with organizations to refine what it is that they want to know about these problems, and also have a capability internally to alert efficiently and staff to go beyond just providing data, to focus on the intelligence aspect, which Mike was talking about, which is ultimately the value for your analyst or your organization is not just don't tell me what the problem is, tell me what I can do about it or how I can be aware of this in the future.
Hey, James, before you move on to your next slide, I just wanted to ask you about on the revenue aspect. One of the threats that we're hearing on a, unfortunately a more infrequent basis is ransomware.
Yep.
As I kind of look at what's going on with ransomware, I think we're still in the early stages of it as a significant risk factor. I think what's going to happen over time is that those that are perpetuating ransomware type of attacks are going to be smarter. They're going to have greater context knowledge of the organizations that they're attacking. So, for example, this doesn't sound good, but let's use it as a for example. So let me attack a hospital when they're most vulnerable.
Yep.
And when might they most be vulnerable? Well, when there's, let's say, a significant weather event, because it's an issue where we can't move people. Healthcare is a people-driven business. If we're having a weather circumstance going on, we can't get people into the hospital to help people that need services. And so why not do my attack when you are most vulnerable, when you're at least able to sustain being out of electronic business? So I was just curious, are you seeing ransomware as a significant risk to organizations?
Oh, I think we'd have to say it is. Typically, small, medium-sized businesses, because they don't have a sophisticated backup infrastructure, right? Part of the confidence that comes from ransomware is if you know that you've got a detached backup, back to the old tape drives or a disconnected, not network-centric backup system, you can have some confidence that you don't have to pay that and you can ignore it. Now, there is time that you need to rebuild your system, but that's some of the confidence that comes with it. As you've mentioned, in a hospital where there's so many systems, so many different types of software and hardware, you really need to work on these continuity plans. You need to work on working with the vendors of all the services that you're using and the equipment to determine whether if one of these, if the machine that goes bing is being bricked, you can't get access to that, therefore you can't keep that patient alive. That's a real problem. So I think, yes, I think there's an education in regards to what does my network look like, right? How are ways that they would get in with that? And typically it's social engineering again, right? It's having somebody fall for something to get that installed, and then it propagates its way through the organization.
Yeah. Just a data point on that. I read a recent report from Symantec, and I think it was close to 8,000 of the organizations that they surveyed said that they are subject to ransomware schemes at least once per month.
Well, and of course, what is the disclosure, right? What is the requirement from a government point of view to disclose that? That's another question that's out there, right? When it's a material effect, and what bucket does that fall in? I think we'll see a lot more about that, Mike, in the coming year or two. But it's a big problem.
Yeah, thank you.
So one of the things that we always focus on, and I'll be brief in this, is how do you determine, to your point, Mike, earlier on, is how is something relevant to me? How is it important? How do I look at this in a perspective that, do I need to ingest this intelligence? Do I need to engage with this vendor? Am I missing something if I don't? And I think it comes down pretty simply into the following three categories with, is it relevant? Does it at least potentially relate to my organization, my industry, and my business? So do I need to have knowledge of this? Is that then actionable? Like, can I do something with it? Can I take action? Or do I make a conscious decision with my risk team or whatever not to? And that is an action too, right? In action, if it's conscious, it is an action itself. And then is it valuable, right? I mean, again, if I've got intelligence coming in about Windows machines and I'm in a Mac shop, that's noise to me. It might be interesting, it might be good conversation fodder, but it doesn't become something that's valuable to my business. And what Mike and I are sort of discussing today is that you can very quickly overwhelm your team with great information, but if it is not something actionable, valuable, and relevant to your organization, it's noise, and it's very difficult for your team to determine what should bubble to the top of the list. So these are sort of questions that you need to ask when you're looking at vendors and when you're looking at intelligence, because again, it's great to have it, but is it going to help your mission? And that's a real question that people grapple with. Now, the other side is we get a lot of customers that have sort of, look in a model like this, which is, that single pane of glass. I've got OSINT data coming in, data that I'm collecting that I need to ingest and analyze. I've got network, telemetry data internally that I've got to process and understand. I've got structured threat data that's coming in through different feeds. I've got log data. I've got the threat mitigation aspect of DLP and other sorts of things, all communicating all at the same time. Some internal data, some external data, and then I need to get this to my operators as quickly as possible so they can make human-related decisions, right? Because again, yes, it's great to have the network-centric data, decisions made and safety nets put in place, at the speed of the network. But then there is the human analyst that I need to put in front of these things to make some decisions, so the technicians, things like that. And that is made at a different rate. And how do I decide what can be done at network speed and what can be done at an analyst speed? And that's part of that dilemma. That's part of that conscious question of how do I let the systems automate what I can and let that be effective, and where do I need the people and the labor, and where do I need to be thinking of that? So one of the things that I wanted to sort of communicate here with this graphic is, the data problem, right? So if we just simply look at, from an open source point of view, crawling and ingesting dark web, deep web, web chats, blogs, and social media and traditional surface web, as Mike pointed out earlier, Again, for a reasonable size global company, the brand, that can be overwhelming in regards to the amount of data or conversations or keywords or things like that are mentioned on a given topic. That then has to be found and discovered. It has to be ingested in some way. It has to be then prioritized, right? So if I have an executive that I'm concerned about from physical violence, how do I determine what the keywords and what the language and how those things relate to one another, right? This person's name being shot, this person's name being stabbed, this person's name being kidnapped, this person's name being doxxed. You get the idea. That's a very difficult job to do efficiently with people, but there's also an element from a human point of view where some of the language for somebody making threats changes. So you can't reliably expect that they're not going to use slang or they're not going to use images to convey those sorts of threats. So there's different elements there you need to think about. And then, of course, there's the 20 to 30 things you need to know that you absolutely need to know each day. So again, when we look at this from a process point of view, from an ingestion point of view, and from a people point of view, it's very overwhelming to most organizations, and this is just one aspect of the business. We're not even talking about weblogs and DLP outputs and the results of your SIM and then other sorts of information that you get. You can get the idea that some practitioners would be very, very overwhelmed.
Hey James, if I could just leverage your over 10 years at LookingGlass, I'd be curious your perspective. How fast is the amount of data grown?
Well, and you've set me up beautifully for this next slide, because it's immense, right? Because when we transition from surface web, IRC chats were very popular, and people would use those. That's certainly a source. And then we saw blogs and forums. But as we see new environments launched online, so we have the Facebooks, and we have the Twitters, and then we have Instagram, and we have whatever the new environment is, that the amount, when they talk about the millions of users they have, think about the millions of content that the posts that they're making, the images they're posting. It is an extreme volume of information that has to be looked at and processed and ingested and stored, and all of that for all the organizations. Even the vendors themselves are sometimes overwhelmed, and we certainly know from certain news sites that come on to the marketplace that their own indexes, right, when you're searching for your friend's name or you're searching for a post within it, are sometimes overwhelmed because the amount of content that's being uploaded by the environment or the ecosystem, the people that are using it, is overwhelming even to them. So, and the other thing, Mike, is the old systems don't go away. So just because Twitter's here doesn't mean that people aren't using IRC. If the dark webs become more popular, if Instagram comes on, and then you have regional sites very similar that are focused. So you've got the Chinese sites that are coming out replicating the same sort of volume and the same sort of systems. It grows exponentially. It's incredible.
No, I agree. I mean, we see that point over and over again. Technology just doesn't get retired.
Yes, it doesn't, and so you have to look at the old and the new, and that's a challenge, I think, for just about anybody in this industry. But as you can see through this graphic, right, there's time, that is a challenge. There's the tools, that's a challenge, and then there's the people, right? And do you have enough people? And again, as you pointed out, right, every new post and every new environment that is launched and the success of that generates a lot more content, and then the 4K video comes out, and then we're able to upload that, and then we've got cars that all have internet access. So we've not only increased the amount of environments, we've increased the size of the files, and we've also increased the amount of time that you now have access to the internet, because now people have devices with them all the time, and they're able to use them as passengers in the vehicle. So now you have 4 members of your family traveling with you on a trip, all posting or generating content, taking photos as you go. So, again, we're certainly in favor of that, and this is what we want. This is a global demand, but it does create a challenge for security professionals or people that worry about this sort of ecosystem. Oh, all right, so that's the challenge, right, from a perspective of data. And then, of course, there's the shortage of labor. And so, again, one of the other challenges that we here at LookingGlass had to compete with is how do we scale that? We have over 200 clients, and we were able to essentially look at tools that make our analysts as efficient as possible at identifying, flagging, highlighting, whatever, and scoring incidents as they come in. And we obviously have a 24/7 operation center. It's essentially a cybersecurity center that we have individuals looking at incidents and reviewing them for our over 200 clients, whether they be, brand or domain or other types of issues. So this was one of the other things that throughout over 20 years of experience in this industry, we had to focus on the same problems that all these businesses are having, right, in regards to I've got an overwhelming amount of data and I've got a limited amount of staff to process that efficiently. What do I do? And then lastly, we've got the business problem of how do I process this and normalize it? So we have surface web, deep web, social media, all with different formats and forums and tagging infrastructure. We have structured data, right? We have the more structured network data that can come out of these devices. And then we got the dark web and deep web and IRC chats. And how can we normalize all of that, feed it through into human vetting so they can look at this and make a determination as rapidly as possible what needs to be sent, and then how do we put it in a position where people can ingest it the way they want? Because again, if I say to you, okay, I've taken all this great data from all these different sources and I'm normalizing it, but then you say, well, I can't, my organization can't look at emails, it's too overwhelming, I need to ingest that into my SIM or have it in some other way. You need to look at, the importance of the intelligence over the value of the platform that you're delivering that intelligence. So therefore, we look at things such as how do we provide it in the most available way, which is API feeds and alerting through email and a portal if you choose to visit that type of thing. So essentially, what LookingGlass did is we sort of had, ironically, for our own business, solved a lot of those problems for scale, for a lot of different industries and business types and business problems. And we boiled that ocean down into a product set that allows small, medium, and large businesses, and yes, everybody of every size needs this in some capacity because, you might be dreaming there as a security professional of, oh, if I could just get 2 more people, and somebody who has 20 people could say, oh, if I could just get 10 more people. Because, as you know, when you discover an incident, it's not just finding it, it is how do I mitigate it and how do I take action, and that investigation takes time. So outside of the firewall, essentially, if I'm generalizing, this is the sort of technology that we focus on, and the type of service we do is called as a service, because we've essentially taken all of that experience of all those clients, all the labor problems that we've solved and the sourcing problems, and we've boiled it down into 3 main business problems, which is information security as a service, brand as a service, and physical security as a service. And in each one of these areas, right, we are looking into all of these social environments, the surface web, the dark and deep web, to provide our clients with as much insight into that as possible. We do it on a 24/7 basis, so we're providing these incidents within moments of detection. We are applying, and one thing you said, Mike, which is very important, is these are not generic alerts. We're not saying, hey, the Syrian Electronic Army tweeted today, you need to know about that. Mm-hmm. We're saying they tweeted your brand, your executive, your asset was talked about today. So it's very focused technology, right? We score it based on your needs as a business, your organization, your business problem, and that's where the clustering of these 3 services focus on. Is it a physical threat? Is it a boycott, a protest? Is it a physical threat against an executive? In the brand case, is it a newly registered domain that is coming after you? Is it a phishing site targeted to your organization that you need to mitigate? Is it some sort of fake social media site leveraging your brand? And then obviously the info security side, is it a payload of data that contains credentials such as usernames and passwords that are your domain, that are your individual, either clients or within your business? So we took that same scale that we did to service our clients over the last 20 years and focused it and boiled it down into these 3 business areas, leveraging all the scalability of our service. And so for my last slide, essentially just reiterating that, which is, when you ask yourself, as Mike has pointed out, whether it's LookingGlass or any other vendor, what is the value of a vendor in this space? It is, in the case of LookingGlass, it's our over 20 years of experience at having to solve the data collection, data detection, and the tooling that allows us to, essentially bring all of that information, normalize it, display it, have somebody make quick decisions about it, and get it in your hands within moments. The other advantage is it's cloud-based, so we also recognize that if I have to work with your network team to install something, to essentially deploy a box, or to load a software on all of your desktops or your security team, that comes with overhead and infrastructure and pain that comes with that. And so essentially to avoid that, a cloud service in this regard, right, a portal or something that you can visit that doesn't require that you download any of that software or install a piece of hardware, can be very beneficial to numerous teams, and it can allow us to set this up and get it deployed within days instead of taking months or weeks to configure and get up. Again, we have 24/7 vetting, so we have a center here, cybersecurity center, that is focused at vetting these, so we're not wasting your time. So in that case where the system finds your brand and the word bomb, right, or you're the bomb, talking about your executive, we know the difference between essentially you're the bomb and I'd like to essentially bomb such and such corporate house. So again, that human vetting allows us to make sure that the tagging is correct, that the data is normalized to the extent that it needs to be, and that it's being interpreted correctly, and you're being woken up at 2 o'clock in the morning on a weekend because it matters, not because the system had a false positive or misread something. And lastly, the availability of the intelligence, right? At the end of the day, it can be fantastic, but if you can't ingest it into your tools, or you can't get it in front of your technical people, if you want an email, or you need a text, or you need to be able to get access to a portal so you can run metrics, or you need an API feed so it can go into your SIM or what have you, you have to think of that as well in regards to how your vendor will provide and deliver that intelligence, because all of these areas here that we've listed, these 4, affect infrastructure, they affect time, they affect how much overhead needs to be dedicated to the service and the intelligence you're receiving, which takes away from your team's time. If it's not efficient, they waste more time trying to get the intelligence than they do processing it. So, Mike, that's sort of what I have in a nutshell for you today.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, I mean, at that last point, it's key to say, don't let the technology manage you. Use technology so that you can manage risk. And I think what happens so often is there's provisioning of technology in the hope that it'll solve a problem. But in itself, that technology is a problem because it takes a lot of effort to get the most out of that technology.
That's right. And I think the buyers and the practitioners aren't always on the same page there, so I think that's one of the conversations that need to take place. It can be a fantastic solution, but if it takes 15 people to deploy it and it takes 6 months, it might not be the right answer.
Exactly. Well, I see we got a number of questions, and so we'll try to get it to as many of them as we can. I'll first ask this first one to you, James. It seems like cyber ecosystem threat protection should be part of SOC responsibilities. Why are outside experts necessary? I think we kind of answered that a little bit, but maybe if you have some additional perspective.
Yeah, I think the SOC is a great place, and again, as I said earlier in the presentation, everybody needs to be doing something in this space. But I think everybody tends to dump on SOCs, right? They are the answer to everything. Once you have one, you just keep diverting everybody's problem to that group. And they have the same issue that we're talking about today, is they have a lot of alert fatigue. If they don't understand fully what the priorities are, if things are stovepiped, right? If your web group regarding websites and weblogs are separated from the internal network capabilities, and then you have an external team, right, your social media team or your PR team, and they're working outside the firewall, and then you have this group from acquisitions and mergers that are buying new domains and not completely communicating within that ecosystem. It's difficult to trust that the SOC has all the information it needs, certainly in the operations area, to be as comprehensive at protecting an organization as they need to. And the other side of it is they quite often don't have all the tools they need to be as efficient. So going to vendors that specialize in some of these areas can help enable that team to be more effective and efficient. And if they're integrated, right, so again through an API feed or plugging directly into a system you already have, they can enhance that system by providing additional context intelligence through feeds, data, or deliveries, things like that. So again,
thanks, James. I just want to add to that. I think this capability for cyber ecosystem threat protection can be very complementary to a SOC. But it's to that other point that you talked about, is the constituents, the consumers of this intelligence are not just the SOC analysts. They are the people that are responsible for marketing and brand development. They are the people that are responsible for human relations and protection of personnel. They need to know this information as well and to respond in an appropriate fashion. It may not be that the SOC personnel are in the best position to provide all the context that's necessary. And so those connections with the right people and the ability to communicate in a way that makes business sense to the consumer of that information, I think is incredibly important.
Yeah.
Let's see, we have another question here. I'd like to ask you this as well, James. How can you, LookingGlass, check if a website or social media site is fake?
Yeah. So there's a couple of things there. So firstly, it's helpful when we work with an organization to understand what their actual assets are, right? So what are the authorized or verified, right? So an organization should work with the environment to try and verify their own platforms. We tend to whitelist or certainly understand what their social media portfolio looks like. And then as we detect any new site, we essentially would check that with the organization, and if it is not a legitimate one, we would then obviously work to have it removed or taken down if possible. I think from a consumer point of view, going to the organization's website and navigating directly from there to the Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram or whatever is the most effective way for an individual to know that if they're seeing messaging that they want to digest or they're particularly interested in following somebody, they have to go through these legitimate paths to get to that actual person, because we see a lot of fake personalities, whether they be sports stars or companies or organizations, and really you go to legitimate sites to be led to that. So we do the same with app stores, right? If you're trying to download a banking app, we always recommend that you go back to that core site. Some of the other tactics you can use is, you can go and look at whois of the website. So if you've got a domain that you're seeing that you're navigating to, if you go to the whois, if it looks like the site was just created in the last couple of months, and it's Coca-Cola or one of the big brands, it's probably unlikely that site is legitimate, right?
Yeah, it kind of gets back to a point that we made earlier. It isn't just one technique; it's multiple techniques.
Correct. Yeah.
And part of the I'll call it the creativity or art form of this activity is choosing the right technique or the most optimal technique for the circumstance.
Yep, I agree with that.
So you're probably seeing the same questions I'm seeing, James. Which one do you want to take next?
Let me look at what we have. I'm sorry. there's one about what due diligence activities should an organization take in regards to the web, because there's lots of different platforms. I think what I would say to that one, Mike, is again, you should start with focusing on your brand, right, your business and your executives. I wouldn't try and eat the whole elephant, right? So start with just some basic Google searches if you haven't done anything, and keep track of it that way. You can certainly set up Google alerts on a lot of these environments, and then expand as you see there's a problem, maybe explore that a little further. There are obviously organizations like ours that you can talk to try and engage. I mean, I think that people naturally think they're going to be very expensive. Again, the services that we've talked about today from our perspective are not costly for organizations. We're trying to cater them in a way that even smaller organizations can get some protection out of the gate. But I think something is better than nothing. I certainly wouldn't go digging around the dark, deep web on my own without any skills. I think that would be risky. So I think, again, there are organizations out there that can help you and certainly help walk through that, even to the point where they can help you train your analysts so they're a little bit more educated in that. But I would think stick to what you're good at, right? If you're a business, you obviously have an expertise, and let other vendors and other organizations take care of some of the other gaps for you, because not all these businesses want to be experts in cyber intelligence or cyber related threats. So let those companies take care of that, and you focus on selling shoes or whatever it is that you do.
Right. No, very good point. It's like understand what your objective is and then choose the appropriate means. I think it's so frequent that, or it's so, it can happen frequently that we're, as organizations, we're attracted to new capabilities, new technologies. Like you said, you could do alerts in Google. Just because you can, should you? Because, like you said, it could create a cascading effect of now we're spending resources doing this sort of activity without necessarily seeing where the end in sight is. How is it actually going to help us in our objective? So, interesting point.
Fantastic, gentlemen. I'm going to have to wrap up at this point. We're a little bit past the top of the hour, and I definitely want to thank both of you, James and Mike, for today's great presentation. Wonderful content. And thank you to our audience today for joining us on our lab webcast. We will be sending a link to today's recording as well as our white paper for you to peruse. You can download. Feel free to share that with your colleagues. And then our final screen has our contact information. If you have any additional questions for us, I know there are a few that we didn't get to, and we will reach out to you directly and make sure to get those answered. But Mike and James, we truly appreciate you being on today, and I appreciate all your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.